anyone can beat the S&P 500. What does that mean? Well, let's go through it. I got some notes here and I wanted to record a video with some of my thoughts. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because the S&P 500 and tracking that's so important. So first, I just wanted to say, you need to take action, and you need to make investing a hobby. Too many people are going through life just flying by the seat of their pants, and if they make money, they make money. If they don't make money, if they save money, paycheck to paycheck, you got to start looking into your investments, your future retirement. It's real, and you need to start sooner than later. Unfortunately, by the time you becomes important to you when you're 60, it might be too late. It will be too late. Time is valuable, and you need to start now. You need to start last year. You need to start 10 years ago. If you don't do it, hear me. You are failing as a leader, as a provider to your family. You're failing your children. You're failing your spouse, and you're failing yourself. So take an interest in your finances, take an interest in budgeting, take an interest in investing and setting yourself up for success. You don't want to leave, well, I don't want to get in these sad scenarios, but you don't want to leave your kids stressed about taking care of you when you can no longer work. So you don't want to do that. So don't fail, work on it and make it a hobby. Part of the hobby part, this is where it comes in, is I've been trying to track the S&P 500 and think, well, how are my investments doing compared to the S&P 500? And this is where I came up with some notes and some ideas for a video. So first off, what's the S&P 500? It's 500 U.S. companies, the top 500 U.S. companies. It's important to be in there because people buy your stock when you're in the S&P 500. Uber just joined the S&P 500 this month or soon, and everyone's buying up Uber stock now because they want to track the S&P 500. Over the last 20, 30 years, S&P 500 has averaged 7 to 9% every year. Now, there's some ups and some downs. Over the last 20 years, the best year it had was 30%. The worst year it had was negative 36%. All right? But on average, it's 7 to 9%, depending on when you look it up. But let's call it 9% for now. So benchmarking the S&P 500, why is this important? Well, great question. When you do your investments, the only strategy that is proven, according to the investing gurus out there, is to buy and hold the S&P 500. What do I mean by that? Well, they basically say, don't pick individual stocks, don't pick ETFs, be very careful about your strategies. Just, you're not going to ever beat the 9% on average. So when I say anyone can beat the S&P 500, anyone can beat the S&P 500, at least for that year. Now, can you beat it consistently? And that is what I like to track. And that is what I want us to start thinking about a little bit. So when in doubt, buy the S&P 500, and that's all you need to hold. So also, for individual stocks, for any sort of investments, I'm a big buy and hold believer. You cannot be day trading and selling and trying to predict peaks and valleys and buy and sell. My strategy is very simple. Buy and hold anything. So we'll get into it more in a little bit, but if you're going individual stocks, if you're going S&P, just buy and hold. If it goes down, average cost in or sell it out. If it goes up, hold it. Hold it. Okay, so which assets do you want to compare against the S&P 500? We all have our net worth, right? We have our 401ks. We have our investment accounts, maybe our Roth IRAs. Maybe we have, what else is in our net worth, right? Cars, houses. We have all these things. Do you really want to compare your house to the S&P 500? Do you really want to get appraisals and see how you're tracking? Because we know Zillow is not always the best estimate for your house price. So I guess it depends on what your personal net worth is made up of. And then that's when you decide how you want to track to the S&P 500. So first, what is benchmarking or tracking the S&P 500? Well, this year, 2023, the S&P 500 is up 23%. Yes, you heard that right. 23%. That means if you just did the very basics, what everybody suggests, buy and hold the S&P 500, your investment account is up 23%. You started with 100 grand, it's now at 123, and it's been a year and you've done nothing. If you do other strategies, you should check how those strategies compare to that 23%, shouldn't you? Don't you want to know how you're doing to the benchmark? So, should you check your house, your car? And it depends. Here's an example. Let's say that I bought a new car. I paid $50,000. It lost a lot of money off the lot. I drove it away. It's now worth 30 the next day. Should I compare that and say that's down 40%? Well, it depends. Are you into car buying? Is that a hobby of yours? Or is that just another piece of your net worth? Is that an alternative investment? Are you, let's just say that you're buying and selling and flipping cars. Well, if you're trying to make money on it, maybe you should compare it to the S&P. Well, if you're just trying to get to work and back, maybe there's no need to compare that asset to the S&P 500. What if you're just flipping cars as a hobby? Well, maybe that could be fun to see how you're doing with your car flipping. And maybe you would say, no, I'm not going to compare it because I'm losing money on it. That's fine too if it's just a hobby. So you got to look at your net worth, where it's broken down. Here's another example. Let's say you bought some silver, some gold. Well, this is used primarily, well, can be used as a hedge against the S&P 500. If the S&P 500 does take a 20% dive, maybe gold and silver would be up during that year. Maybe not. If the S&P is up, does it really make sense to compare your silver and gold to the S&P 500? It all depends. If you only have 1 or 2% of your net worth, it's really not going to change your overall investments. But at the end of the day, you want to do a year in review. Look at all of your investments. Starting balance, ending balance. What's the change? Compare that change to the S&P 500. My favorite things to compare are the investments. So I'm talking the 401ks and the individual investment accounts. That's the most important thing to compare, because it's not a matter of should you buy a house sometimes or should you invest in the S&P. In the TD Ameritrade, which has gone down, in the Charles Schwab accounts, in the 401ks, you can buy S&P or you can do other stuff. So I want to check, what am I doing with that other stuff in those investment accounts? So I'd say start focusing on your individual investments accounts, and those are the ones you want to benchmark to the S&P. Don't stress too much about your other hobbies, your sneaker collection, and how that's doing, but really focus on the accounts. Now, one thing you need to remember is don't trust anything that these accounts say as far as your year-to-date return. You always want to calculate it off in a different spreadsheet. Why? Well, they don't understand the daily average balance. That's the key to calculating your return. When you put in a deposit, you need to factor that into your return. For example, say you have a $100,000 account and you put in $100,000 on day one. Well, that's $200,000 for the year. If it goes up to $240,000 at the end of the year, well, you made $40,000 off of $200,000. Quick math, you did 20% that year. Great. Now, if you did $100,000 same year, and on the very last day you deposited that same extra $120,000 and you ended in the same spot at $240,000, two completely different fact patterns, well, guess what? You did 40% that year, not 20%, because you made all that $40,000 off of that initial $100,000. So it's all about your daily average balance. You need to recalculate that so you can get apples to apples, so you can track your deposits and your withdrawals, and then you find out your rate of return. The 401k is very difficult for this because you have a lot of paychecks that you're depositing in. Okay, so you gotta figure out that. So good luck on that research. But anyways, what are some strategies to beat? It's gonna be a long video, I guess. If you're still watching, thank you. But probably nobody's here, so everybody thumbs down the video and left right away. So anyways, so talking to myself and maybe my son when he's older and he watches this, or my daughter. How do you beat the S&P 500? is 23%. How do I get more than that? Should I even try? Well, that's the thing. That's the fun part of this, is trying and failing or beating it. So some strategies. You can get mutual funds, ETFs, right? ETFs, track an index. Mutual funds usually has a manager, does have a manager, right? You can do stock. You can do options. You can do buy, calls, puts, all these fancy options. A lot of different ways to try to beat it. One of the fun things that I discovered, which can help you really beat it or really get slaughtered by it, is these ETFs that do 3 times the amount of a certain index. So if the S&P is up 20% in the year, you make 60%. If the S&P is down 20%, you lose 60%. So if you think they're going to have a good year, then you get a triple ETF and you reap 3 times the rewards. Now you can have a 2X or a 1X. 1X is just buying the S&P, and that's the benchmark, right? So moving through this long list I have here. Your 401k, you only have limited options to pick to try to beat the S&P 500. So what I like to do is, in my 401k, I like to track the S&P 500 pretty closely. So I'll do a little percentage for international, a big percentage for some blue chips, and some, which is like, let's just call it the top 20, 30 companies, and then a large percentage on the S&P 500. It's hard to get too aggressive or to try to beat the S&P too bad in your 401k. So now in your individual investments, this is where you want to buy and hold individual stocks if you want to try to beat it. I don't know if you want to try to beat it. Since I have enough money in my 401k, I think I'm going to try to beat it in my individual investments account. Of course, do a Roth IRA, right? So I don't have to pay taxes, and I pick some stocks, all right? So if you're like me, it's time to do your annual review, try to look at your stocks. So a couple things of note this year, which is exciting. I haven't done my annual review yet because I want to do it in January, is the NASDAQ is up 40%, and I did put a lot in triple NASDAQ in January. So that's 120% that I'm expecting in that stock. Tesla's had a great year. It's up. That's why the NASDAQ's up, right? I own that. I have a couple other small companies. I have a Bitcoin miner that went up. All right. So I have a lot of good stocks this year, but I also have some losers, right? Hasbro was my biggest loser. Peloton, loser stock. So at the end of the day, this is all about tracking your investments and comparing to the S&P 500 and figuring out why that's important. I'll wrap it up here. You're saying, thank goodness. I know. Diversification is key, all right? You don't want to try to beat the S&P 500 with any funds that you can't afford to lose or to significantly lose on. Now, I like to have a diversification between having some money in the S&P 500 and fighting against it. And hard assets like a house is a great diversification to your S&P. You want to have a well-balanced portfolio. The amount that you're trying to beat the S&P 500 should not be the majority of your net worth. In fact, should be a small portion of your net worth, all right? Because anyone can beat it, but nobody can beat it consistently. At the end of the day, you need to decide, are you wanting to gamble? Or are you wanting to play it safe and match the S&P 500? So the question is, did I beat the S&P 500 in 2023? The answer is to be determined. I like my chances though. 23% is a high bar. I like my chances. So what are you doing to track your investments, and how are you comparing them to the benchmark? And how are you doing? Let's look back a couple of years. Let's get activated. Let's start paying attention to our finances. Let's start looking to the future. Let's start building a better future.